his theory has always been that the government is collecting the income tax illegally, that they're collecting the tax in an unconstitutional manner, and they're collecting it in violation of the Internal Revenue Code itself. And he's always wanted to challenge that, and he's written several books on that. And he has a lot of theories that are credible, but the courts are rejecting them. But I've spoken to a lot of lawyers, I've spoken to a lot of judges personally who have read my father's stuff, who tell me off the record that they agree with him, that they think from a purely technical point of view he's right, but from a practical matter he's not going to win. The judges are not going to follow the law. They're going to do what they think they need to do, which is protect the government's revenue sources. So the stuff the federal government does is illegal, but the courts don't care. The courts look the other way. The problem with my father is he refused to acknowledge this. See, I've always acknowledged the practicality of the fact that, look, it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what the law says. The government's going to do what it wants to do. And the courts are going to support that. The courts don't care. They have an agenda. They're going to support government power because they think that the government is using it benevolently. They have an agenda of their own. And my father could never accept that. He was always, but this is what it is, and I want to go to court, and I want to vindicate this. And he wanted to be proven right, not only for himself, but he thought that the country was going in the wrong direction. He thought that the income tax was one of the main reasons our economy was in decline, that the government was destroying our country with excess taxes, particularly income taxes, and that if he could somehow force the government to collect the tax legally, that they wouldn't be able to collect it. Because that's the real big problem. When our country was first established, there was no income tax, and we ended up amending the Constitution to try to make room for one in 1913. But initially, an income tax was inconsistent with the principles in our Constitution. I don't think he ever got a fair hearing on it. I think most of the things that he did, the judges just summarily dismissed. Most of his arguments that were put before the judges, the government never even responded. I mean, my father would file a motion, the government would do nothing, and the court would rule in favor of the government. I mean, if the judge is supposed to be a referee, how can my father lose when the other side doesn't even throw a punch? So it was always like my father would go to court, and instead of having an impartial judge, the judge was also his adversary. So he never really had a fair hearing. And of course, whatever you want to say about my father, he's sincere in his beliefs. He's not paying taxes because he's trying to get away with something. He's not, cheating on his taxes like the majority of Americans who, claim credit for a deduction that isn't legitimate, or maybe they don't declare some money they earned. They went to a casino, they won $1,000, they didn't declare it. I mean, that's commonplace. My father didn't do any of that. My father told the IRS exactly what he was doing. He said, I'm not paying my taxes, and here's why. So he wasn't hiding. He wasn't committing fraud. He was being honest. So the worst thing you can say about him is that he was mistaken. But, we don't put people in jail for being mistaken. Maybe we fine them. It's a civil penalty, but it's not criminal. So he should not be in jail. I think the only reason he's in jail is because the government wanted to make an example of him. The government wants to say, look, you don't pay your taxes and you go to jail, just like Irwin Schiff. I pay a lot of taxes. I pay more than my father's fair share as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, and I've paid my taxes all my life, and I've encouraged my father to pay taxes as well. I mean, it was something very difficult for him to accept. But I recognized a long time ago that what he was doing was not going to be successful. That he was not going to prevail with his theories in courts based on the judicial system as it existed today. And I tried to convey that to my dad, but he just, would never accept that. And as much as I tried to get him to focus his talents in other areas and to give up this fight with the IRS, I mean, he always kept saying, I've got a tiger by the tail, and I can't let go. And that was my father. And there was just no stopping him from this quest. And no matter what other people said, not just me, other people would try to tell him, look, how could you win? You can't win this. I mean, it's so stacked against you. They needed to put him in jail because they needed the publicity. They needed the deterrent. And I tried to impart, let him know about that, years and years ago. That hey, this is just, you're a talented guy, you're a very bright guy, there are better ways that you can try to use those gifts and help the country and educate the country than to spend all your time fighting a battle that you can't win. And so that's, I've taken a very different approach to, what I'm doing, the way I'm trying to educate Americans about the problems in our economy and the way the government is contributing to those problems. And I'm trying to help a lot of individual Americans protect their wealth through the way they organize their investments. But I am not, encouraging them to, fight the IRS, to stop paying their taxes, to engage in civil disobedience, or as in my father's case, he doesn't even think it's civil disobedience. He thinks he's obeying the law. He doesn't think there's any laws that he's breaking. He thinks it's the government that's breaking the law.